The company was well known in its industry. It had a strong reputation for innovation and success, with a large team working hard every day. The leadership cared about growth, and they often talked about bringing new talent on board. This time they were looking for someone to fill an important role in the marketing department. The job was meant for a mid-level manager who could help lead campaigns and build the company's brand in fresh ways. The HR department had the task of finding the right person. They received many applications from hopeful candidates. The team narrowed the list down to a handful of people who seemed to have good experience and the right skills. Among these candidates was a woman named Danielle. On paper, Danielle looked like a perfect fit. She had a strong background, with years of experience in marketing for well-known companies. She had worked hard, climbed the ranks, and earned respect from her peers. What made this situation unusual was that nobody in HR knew a very important fact about Danielle. She wasn't just any applicant. She was actually married to the CEO of the company. The CEO, Thomas, had asked her to apply and go through the interview process without revealing who she was. He wanted to see how the company would treat someone like her. Would the hiring process be fair? Would the company really practice the diversity and inclusion it talked about? This was a test to find out if their values matched their actions. On the day of the interview, Danielle arrived at the company building. She dressed neatly in professional clothes, carrying a small bag with her resume and notes. She was calm but alert, ready to answer questions and show why she was right for the role. She knew the company well but decided to act just like any other candidate, not expecting special treatment. At the reception desk, Danielle smiled politely and told the assistant her name and that she was there for an interview. The assistant gave her a quick nod and handed her a visitor's badge. There was no extra warmth or welcome, just business as usual. Danielle was used to this kind of indifferent reception during interviews, but she felt a little uneasy. Something felt different this time. A few minutes later, a man came to escort her to the interview room. His name was Greg, and he was the HR manager responsible for conducting interviews for the position. Greg looked tired and distracted. He barely smiled and didn't offer to shake her hand or introduce himself properly. Danielle noticed this but didn't say anything. She reminded herself that sometimes people had bad days. The interview started, but it quickly became clear that Greg wasn't interested in having a real conversation. He skimmed through her resume but seemed impatient. Instead of asking open questions about her experience or skills, Greg made some quick judgments. "I see you've moved between a few companies. That looks like you can't stick with one job. Is that true?" he asked sharply. Danielle felt a sting but kept her tone calm. "I've taken on different roles to grow my skills and find the best fit for my talents." "Each move was intentional," she replied. Greg frowned. "It just seems unstable to me. Companies want someone reliable." The interview continued, but the tone didn't improve. Greg asked questions that felt like he was testing her loyalty more than her ability. When Danielle mentioned her leadership experience, Greg interrupted. "Leadership? In what way? I don't see anything extraordinary here." At one point, Greg even made a careless comment about diversity hiring, saying, "Honestly, sometimes I wonder if some candidates get jobs just because of their background rather than their skills." Danielle's eyes narrowed slightly, but she stayed composed. She had heard things like this before and knew how to handle it without losing her professionalism. "I believe skills and performance should always matter most," she said evenly. Greg didn't respond. He glanced at his watch and said, "Well, I think we're done here. We'll let you know if we decide to move forward." Danielle stood up, smiled politely, and thanked him. She walked out of the room but didn't leave the building. Instead, she made her way quietly to the executive floor, where her husband's office was located. The receptionist there recognized her immediately and greeted her warmly. Danielle felt a small sense of relief after the coldness she had just experienced. She knocked on the CEO's office door and stepped inside. Thomas was working at his desk but looked up as soon as she entered. "How did it go?" he asked, his voice calm but curious. Danielle sat down and took a deep breath. "It was disappointing," she said simply. "The HR manager didn't seem interested in what I had to offer. He was rude, dismissive, and even made some disrespectful remarks about diversity. I stayed professional, but it was clear they weren't looking for someone like me." Thomas frowned deeply. "That's not acceptable," he said. "I wanted to see if the company truly valued diversity and fairness." "It looks like we have a big problem." Danielle nodded. "If this is how interviews are handled, many good candidates might be discouraged." It's not just about me, it's about the culture here. The CEO leaned back in his chair, clearly troubled. We need to address this. No one should feel disrespected or undervalued, especially not at the first step. Danielle looked at him and felt a mix of sadness and determination. She had taken the challenge to test the company's values seriously. Now she knew the truth. The company had some work to do. Danielle waited in the small interview room, her heart steady but her mind alert. She noticed the plain walls and the single window that let in some daylight, but the room felt cold and unfriendly. The chair was stiff, and the table between her and the HR manager created an invisible barrier. She had been through many interviews before, but this one already felt different. When the HR manager, Greg, entered, Danielle offered a polite smile, hoping to ease some tension. But Greg barely looked up. Instead, he flipped through her resume on his tablet, his eyes scanning quickly without much interest. It was as if he was checking a list rather than trying to understand her story. He started the conversation without any introduction. "No, nice to meet you," or "Thanks for coming in today." Just a blunt, "So you've had quite a few jobs over the years. Why so many changes?" His tone wasn't curious. It was accusatory. Danielle took a moment before answering. She didn't want to sound defensive, but she also didn't want to let his attitude slide. "I moved between companies because I wanted to grow and take on new challenges," she explained gently. "Each position helped me learn something new and prepared me for bigger responsibilities." Greg raised his eyebrows but didn't seem convinced. "It just looks like you can't stick with one place," he said flatly. "Companies want people who stay." Danielle thought about how many times she had heard that same phrase in interviews. She knew that job hopping was often misunderstood, but she also knew the importance of showing commitment. "I understand that," she said calmly. "But I believe it's also important to find the right fit, where you can make a real difference." Greg barely responded. Instead, he started asking about her education and certifications, but even those questions felt rushed. He didn't ask her to explain her projects or accomplishments, just checked off boxes. Then things took a turn. Greg made a comment that caught Danielle off guard. "You know," he said casually, "sometimes I wonder if companies are just hiring people to meet diversity quotas. It doesn't always feel like the most qualified get the job." The words hung in the air, heavy and uncomfortable. Danielle kept her face neutral but felt her heart tighten. She had heard remarks like this before, but never from someone who was supposed to be responsible for hiring fairly. She took a deep breath and replied, "I believe everyone should be hired based on their skills and ability to contribute. Diversity can be a strength when people are valued for what they bring, not just their background." Greg shrugged and glanced at his watch. "All right, I think that's enough for now," he said abruptly. "We'll be in touch." Danielle nodded politely and stood up. She shook his hand, but it was a cold, brief gesture. As she walked out of the room, she tried not to let the experience shake her confidence. She reminded herself that interviews weren't always about proving herself to others. They were also a chance to learn about the company. Instead of leaving the building, Danielle headed straight to the executive floor. She felt the weight of the interview pressing down on her, but she knew she had to share what happened. The receptionist greeted her with a warm smile, a sharp contrast to the chill she had just experienced. When she entered her husband's office, Thomas looked up from his paperwork. "How did it go?" he asked quietly. Danielle sat down and looked him in the eye. "It was disappointing," she said honestly. "The HR manager wasn't interested in my experience or skills. He seemed impatient and dismissive. At one point, he made a comment about diversity that was disrespectful." Thomas's expression darkened. "That's unacceptable," he said firmly. "I asked you to do this because I wanted to see if the company was really fair. This tells me we have some serious problems." Danielle nodded. "I stayed professional, but it was clear they weren't looking for someone like me. If this is how they treat candidates, it says a lot about the company culture." Thomas leaned back, thinking deeply. "We need to fix this. No one should feel undervalued or disrespected, especially not during an interview. This experience shows there's a gap between what we say and what actually happens." Danielle felt a mix of frustration and resolve. She had accepted this challenge because she cared about the company's future. Now she saw that change was needed, starting from the very people who were supposed to welcome new talent. They talked about what could be done next. Thomas promised to look into the HR practices and ensure that respect and fairness were real priorities. Danielle knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but she was ready to help make things better. As she left the office, Danielle felt a renewed sense of purpose. The interview had been hard, but it had also revealed an important truth. Sometimes the hardest experiences were the ones that sparked the most needed changes. The interview room was quiet, except for the sound of Greg flipping through papers on his desk. Danielle sat upright, careful to stay calm despite the tension she felt. She could tell from the way Greg looked at her that he had already made up his mind. His eyes scanned her resume without any real curiosity, and his tone was flat and impatient. Greg started asking questions, but they didn't feel like the usual interview questions meant to understand a candidate's strengths or goals. Instead, they were short, sharp, and often felt like challenges. "So you say you led a team in your last job," Greg said, tapping a finger on the table. "What exactly did you do?" "I don't see anything that stands out." Danielle took a breath, steadying herself. She knew that sometimes people doubted her because of who she was or where she came from, but she had learned over the years to answer clearly, without anger or frustration. "I managed a team of 10 people," she said evenly. "We successfully launched multiple campaigns that increased sales and customer engagement. I worked closely with different departments to align our marketing strategies with company goals." Greg gave a dismissive grunt. "That sounds like normal work." "Everyone says that." Danielle nodded but didn't push back. She could see he wasn't really listening. Instead, he quickly moved on to the next question. "Why do you think you're the right fit here? We have a specific culture and sometimes candidates don't fit well." Danielle smiled slightly. "I believe I can bring new ideas while respecting the company's existing values. I'm a team player and open to learning." Greg raised his eyebrows and leaned forward. "But what if your ideas don't fit? Would you be willing to change your approach?" She thought about it for a moment before answering honestly. "I'm flexible and willing to adjust if it helps the team succeed. But I also believe in standing up for good ideas that can improve results." Greg's face hardened. He didn't like that answer. He interrupted. "We don't just hire people who talk a lot. We want action." Danielle could feel the impatience growing. She noticed he was tapping his pen nervously and checking the clock. She realized he was rushing to finish rather than understand. Then came the moment that really shocked her. Greg said almost casually, "To be honest, sometimes I think companies hire people just to fill diversity quotas. It's not always about skills." Danielle froze for a second. She wasn't sure if he realized how disrespectful that sounded. It was like he was accusing her of not earning her place, but she forced herself to respond calmly. "I believe everyone should be judged by their skills and contributions," she said carefully. "Diversity is important because it brings different perspectives and strengths. But it's never enough on its own. You have to back it up with real ability." Greg shrugged, clearly not interested in a longer conversation. "Well, we'll see if you fit the role. We'll be in touch." Danielle stood and smiled politely. She thanked him and left the room, feeling a mix of emotions. She was disappointed and frustrated, but she also felt proud of how she handled herself. She walked through the quiet halls toward the elevator, her mind racing. She wondered how many other candidates had faced similar treatment, and how that might affect the company's ability to grow and succeed. Instead of leaving the building, she decided to go to the executive floor. The receptionist greeted her warmly, a comforting contrast to the coldness she'd felt earlier. She knocked on the CEO's door and stepped inside. Thomas looked up from his papers, a look of concern on his face. "How did it go?" he asked gently. Danielle took a deep breath and sat down. "It wasn't good," she said honestly. The HR manager was dismissive and uninterested. He didn't ask meaningful questions or seem to value my experience. He even made a comment suggesting diversity hires aren't always qualified. Thomas's face tightened. "That's unacceptable," he said. "I wanted to test our hiring process to see if it was fair and respectful. This tells me there are serious problems we need to fix." Danielle nodded. "If this is the way candidates are treated, it sends a message that the company doesn't truly value people. It's not just about me. It's about building a culture where everyone feels respected and supported." Thomas leaned back, thinking deeply. "We have to act quickly. No one should leave an interview feeling disrespected or dismissed. This could cost us talented people." They talked for a while about what could be done. Thomas promised to review the HR policies and look into training for his team. Danielle offered to help by sharing her experiences and ideas to improve how the company hires and treats candidates. As she left the office, Danielle felt a mix of emotions, frustration at the experience, but also hope. The interview had been difficult, but it had also opened a door to change. She knew it wouldn't be easy, but she was ready to work with Thomas and the team to make the company a better place for everyone. Danielle left the CEO's office feeling a mix of relief and concern. She had shared the truth with her husband, the CEO, and now she wondered what would happen next. The company's leadership had to know what was really going on behind the scenes, especially in the hiring process. It was clear to her that something had to change. After the interview, Danielle didn't want to just walk away quietly. She knew many people who had faced similar situations but felt powerless to speak up. She believed that if she stayed silent, nothing would improve. She thought about all the talented people who might be turned away because of bias or unfairness. She decided to take a few moments to collect her thoughts in the building's quiet lounge area. The soft hum of the air conditioning and the distant sounds of keyboards typing created a calm background. Danielle looked around and noticed other employees chatting and working. They seemed busy and focused, but she wondered how many of them had ever faced discrimination or disrespect. Her mind went back to the interview room, to the coldness in the HR manager's eyes and the dismissive way he treated her. She thought about how important it was to feel seen and valued, especially when you are trying to prove yourself. Danielle had faced challenges throughout her career, but she always believed in the power of kindness and respect. Just then, her phone buzzed. It was a message from Thomas. He thanked her for being honest and told her he was already planning to talk to the HR team. Knowing that the CEO was taking the issue seriously gave Danielle hope. Maybe this could be the start of something better. Later that day, Thomas called an urgent meeting with the company's senior leadership. The conference room filled quickly with department heads and HR staff. Everyone sensed the seriousness of the situation but didn't yet know all the details. Thomas stood at the front and spoke clearly. "We have a problem in our hiring process. It has come to my attention that some of our team members are not treating candidates with the respect they deserve. We pride ourselves on diversity and fairness, but we need to ask ourselves if our actions match our words." The room was quiet. Some people shifted in their seats. The HR manager who had interviewed Danielle was there, looking uncomfortable, but trying to keep a calm expression. Thomas continued, "I asked my wife to apply anonymously to see how we treat candidates. What she experienced was unacceptable. We cannot allow disrespect or bias in our company. We need to fix this immediately." One of the senior HR team members spoke up. "We want to make things right. We will review our interview training and make sure all staff understand how important this is." Thomas nodded. "That's a start, but we need to do more. We need transparency and accountability. We will conduct an audit of our hiring process and invite feedback from candidates and employees. We want to build a culture where everyone feels welcomed and valued." The HR manager who interviewed Danielle remained silent. After the meeting, he was asked to step aside while the company investigated. It was a difficult moment for him, but the leadership knew that accountability was necessary. Meanwhile, Danielle watched from a distance. She felt a mixture of relief and nervousness. She didn't want anyone to lose their job, but she also knew that change required action. The company had to send a clear message that disrespect would not be tolerated. Over the next few weeks, the company began to make changes. They introduced new training sessions focused on unconscious bias and respectful communication. They revised their interview guidelines to ensure fairness and consistency. Feedback channels were opened so candidates could share their experiences anonymously. Danielle was invited to join a new diversity and inclusion committee. She felt honored but also aware of the responsibility. She wanted to help create an environment where no one would face the same disrespect she had experienced. One day, as she walked through the office, she noticed employees from different departments talking openly about diversity and inclusion. They shared ideas and listened to one another. It was a small change, but it felt real and hopeful. Danielle knew there was still a long way to go. Changing company culture wasn't easy, and old habits didn't disappear overnight. But this was a start. She believed that with patience, honesty, and effort, the company could become a place where everyone was treated with respect, no matter who they were or where they came from. Looking back on that difficult interview day, Danielle realized it was a turning point, not just for her, but for the whole company. Sometimes the hardest moments teach us the most important lessons. And so the story of that interview became more than just a personal experience. It became a catalyst for change, a reminder that fairness and kindness must always be at the heart of every company, every decision, and every conversation. After the meeting, things in the company started to shift, slowly but surely. Danielle noticed small changes when she came to work. The atmosphere felt a little lighter. People seemed more open to talking about diversity and respect. It was clear that the leadership was serious about fixing the problems. One morning, Danielle received an email inviting her to join a special group in the company. This group was called the Diversity and Inclusion Committee. The goal was to bring employees together to talk about fairness, equal opportunities, and creating a respectful workplace. Danielle felt proud to be asked. She knew this was a chance to help make a real difference. The first meeting of the committee was held in a bright conference room, with big windows letting in the sunlight. There were employees from many different departments, young and old, men and women, people from different backgrounds. Everyone was there because they cared about making the company a better place. Danielle sat among them, listening as people shared their stories and ideas. Some spoke about times they had felt ignored or judged unfairly. Others talked about the importance of understanding each other's experiences. The conversation was honest and sometimes emotional, but it was also hopeful. Danielle shared her own story about the interview. She explained how she had been treated and why it hurt. But she also spoke about the chance for change. "This is not just about me," she said softly. "It's about all of us working together to build a place where everyone feels welcome and respected." The committee agreed on several important actions. They planned training sessions to help everyone recognize unconscious bias. That is, the hidden assumptions we all carry without realizing it. They also wanted to create clear guidelines for interviews to make sure every candidate was treated fairly, no matter who they were. Over the next few weeks, the company invited an expert to lead workshops on respect and inclusion. Employees gathered in groups to learn about how their words and actions could affect others. Many people admitted they hadn't thought about some of these issues before. The workshops opened their eyes. Danielle saw some of her coworkers change in small but meaningful ways. People started to listen more carefully during meetings. They asked better questions when working with others. It was like a quiet shift in how everyone treated each other. The HR department also began to change. The interview process was redesigned to be more structured and fair. Questions were written to focus on skills and experience, not personal background. Interviewers were trained to be aware of their own biases and to treat every candidate with respect. One day, Danielle was asked to observe a few interviews. She watched as the HR team carefully followed the new process. The candidates were welcomed warmly and given the chance to talk about their strengths. The atmosphere felt different, more open and positive, but Danielle knew the work was not finished. Changing people's attitudes and habits took time. She heard stories from colleagues who still faced challenges or unfair treatment. The company had started on a good path, but there was much more to do. Outside of work, Danielle also reflected on her own experiences. She realized how important it was to speak up and stand strong, even when things felt unfair. She thought about all the people who didn't have a voice or were too afraid to share their stories. She decided to write a letter to the entire company. In simple words, she told them about her interview experience, not to blame anyone, but to encourage everyone to be kind and fair. She reminded them that every person who walks into the office or logs on for a meeting deserves respect. The letter was shared by the CEO during a company-wide meeting. Thomas spoke about the company's commitment to change and thanked Danielle for her courage. He promised that respect and fairness would always be a priority. Danielle felt proud but also humble. She knew this was just one step on a long journey. She hoped that by sharing her story, she could inspire others to speak up and help create a better future. The company began to celebrate its small successes. They recognized employees who showed kindness and openness. They encouraged teamwork and honest conversations. Slowly, the workplace culture started to feel warmer and more welcoming. Danielle's journey showed her that real change is possible, but it requires honesty, courage, and patience. It's not just about policies or training. It's about how people treat one another every day. Looking back, Danielle understood that the difficult interview had been a test, not just for the company, but for herself. It challenged her to stay strong, to believe in fairness, and to help build a better place for everyone. After the company started making changes, Danielle could feel a slow but steady difference around her. The air seemed a little lighter, and there was more kindness in how people spoke to each other. But Danielle knew real change wouldn't happen overnight. It needed time, patience, and consistent effort. One day, she received an invitation from the CEO to join a small team working on a new project. The goal was to create a better hiring experience for everyone applying to the company. Danielle felt honored. This was a chance to use her experience to make sure no one else went through what she did. The team was made up of people from different departments: HR, operations, marketing, and even some newer employees. Everyone was eager to help. They began by looking closely at the current hiring process. They studied how interviews were planned, how questions were asked, and how decisions were made. Danielle shared what she had experienced during her interview. She explained how the HR manager seemed uninterested, rushed, and sometimes unfair. The group listened carefully. Many admitted they had never thought about how important respect was in interviews. They realized that the way candidates are treated shows a lot about the company's true values. Together, they made a plan. First, they wanted to rewrite the interview questions to focus only on skills and experience. No questions would be allowed that could make someone feel judged for who they were, where they came from, or what they looked like. Next, they created a guide to help interviewers behave respectfully. This guide reminded them to listen carefully, be patient, and treat every candidate like a person, not just a file on a desk. The team also decided to bring in a coach to train all employees involved in hiring. This coach taught them about unconscious bias, the small hidden ideas that sometimes affect our decisions without us realizing it. The training helped people see how easy it was to make unfair judgments and how to avoid them. One morning, Danielle joined a training session. The room was full of HR staff and managers. The coach asked them to share moments when they might have made quick decisions about others. Many people hesitated, but slowly stories came out. Some talked about judging candidates by their accents or the way they dressed. Others admitted they had assumed someone wasn't right for a job because of their age or background. Danielle felt a strong sense of connection with the group. She knew that admitting mistakes was hard, but it was also the first step toward real change. After the training, Danielle and the team worked on a new system to get feedback from candidates after their interviews. This feedback was anonymous, so people could be honest without fear. The company wanted to learn from every experience, especially the bad ones. Within a few weeks, the feedback started to come in. Some candidates said the new process felt fair and welcoming. They appreciated that interviewers asked clear questions and gave them time to speak. Others pointed out places where the company could still improve, like making sure interviews didn't feel rushed or cold. Danielle read through the comments carefully. Some were encouraging, but others reminded her that there was still work to be done. She shared the feedback with the team, and they used it to make the process better. Meanwhile, Danielle noticed changes outside of the hiring process too. Meetings became more respectful and people were more careful with their words. When disagreements happened, employees tried to listen more and understand each other instead of arguing. One day, during a team meeting, Danielle saw an example of this new attitude. Two coworkers disagreed about how to approach a project. In the past, this might have ended in frustration or silence, but this time they calmly explained their views and listened to each other. In the end, they found a solution that worked for both. Danielle smiled, feeling proud of the progress. It was clear that respect wasn't just about interviews. It was about how people treated each other every day. At home, she and Thomas often talked about the changes happening in the company. Thomas was committed to supporting the efforts and making sure leadership stayed involved. He knew that change had to start from the top, and he wanted to lead by example. One evening, as they sat quietly after dinner, Danielle shared some of the stories she had heard from employees. "Some people are really opening up," she said. "They want to be better, but they need guidance and support." Thomas nodded thoughtfully. "It's a journey," he said. "We have to keep listening and learning. I want this company to be a place where everyone can succeed no matter who they are," Danielle agreed. She knew that building a culture of respect and fairness wasn't just a task for HR or leadership. It was everyone's responsibility. Over the next few months, the company held regular meetings to discuss diversity and inclusion. They invited guest speakers who shared stories about overcoming bias and building stronger teams. These events became popular and helped create a sense of community. Danielle also started mentoring some younger employees who felt unsure about their place in the company. She encouraged them to be confident and speak up. She told them her story and reminded them that their voices mattered. One day, a young employee came to her with a problem. She felt like she wasn't being heard during meetings because of her background. Danielle listened carefully and helped her prepare to share her ideas more clearly. Together, they practiced ways to communicate with confidence. The young employee later told Danielle that she felt more empowered and hopeful. That moment was one of Danielle's proudest. She realized that small acts of support could make a big difference in someone's life. Even though there were still challenges, Danielle felt hopeful about the future. She had seen how honesty, patience, and kindness could start a ripple effect. The company was not perfect, but it was moving forward. Sometimes Danielle thought back to that difficult interview. It was a painful memory, but also a turning point. It showed her the power of speaking up and standing strong for what is right. She knew the story wasn't over. Change would take time and effort from everyone, but she believed that together they could build a workplace where respect and fairness were not just words, but the way people truly lived. Months had passed since Danielle's uncomfortable interview. A lot had changed in the company since then. But change, she knew, wasn't just about new rules or training sessions. It was about people. Real people, and how they treated one another when no one was watching. She had seen progress. Interviewers were more careful and thoughtful now. New hires shared that they felt respected and welcomed. Managers started listening more during meetings, and employees from different backgrounds were slowly feeling more included. The walls of silence that once existed were beginning to come down, but not everything was perfect. Danielle still received quiet messages from employees who felt unheard. Some were afraid to speak up. Others didn't know how to. There were moments when small biases still slipped into conversations. Subtle, unkind comments that made people uncomfortable but were brushed off as jokes or just opinions. One day, Danielle met with a group of junior employees for a feedback session. They sat in a circle in a simple meeting room. No presentation, no charts. Just people talking honestly. One person said, "Sometimes I feel like I have to prove myself twice as much just to be taken seriously." Another nodded and added, "When I speak up with ideas, they get ignored. But when someone else repeats them, suddenly it's a great suggestion." Danielle listened carefully, taking in every word. These were not just complaints. These were real experiences. They reminded her of how she felt the day she sat across from the HR manager, being treated like she didn't belong. She cleared her throat gently and said, "You don't have to keep quiet. Your experiences are real and they matter. We're working on change, but we can't fix what we don't talk about." That simple meeting stayed with her. She realized something important. Real change doesn't just come from top-down policies. It comes from people feeling safe enough to speak, and others willing to listen, without judgment, without defensiveness. So, she decided to try something new. She set up what she called Open Hour, 1 hour a week where anyone in the company could drop by and talk. No appointment, no specific topic, just open conversation. Some weeks no one came, but other weeks the small meeting room would fill with quiet voices and honest sharing. Employees talked about moments when they felt invisible, times they wanted to ask questions but were afraid of looking foolish, situations where they wished someone had stood up for them. Danielle didn't interrupt. She didn't try to fix everything on the spot. She simply listened, and that alone was powerful. Word started to spread. People began to realize that this company was not just changing its policies, it was changing its heart. One afternoon, during one of these open sessions, a man from the IT department shared something that surprised everyone. He said, "When I first joined, I used to joke around in ways I thought were harmless. But after attending the inclusion sessions, I realized some of those jokes made others uncomfortable. I didn't mean to hurt anyone, but now I know better." The room went quiet for a moment. Then someone said, "Thank you for saying that." That moment was proof that change was happening not just in words, but in actions. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, Danielle and the team were working on a new plan, a long-term approach to keep the company accountable. They created an internal report that tracked hiring diversity, promotion rates, and employee satisfaction. But unlike many companies that hid such data, they decided to share it with everyone in the company. The report was simple, honest, It showed areas of progress, but also places where the company was still struggling. And at the end of that report was a message. We're not perfect, but we're not silent. We're listening. We're learning. And we're committed. Danielle had written those words herself. She wanted the entire organization to feel ownership of this journey. Around this time, something unexpected happened. The HR manager, the same man who had once interviewed Danielle and made her feel so small, requested a meeting with her. She was surprised but agreed to meet. They sat in the same room where their first meeting had taken place, but the energy was very different now. He looked nervous but sincere. He started by saying, "I want to apologize. I didn't treat you with the respect you deserved. Back then, I didn't see what I was doing wrong. But over these past few months, I've learned a lot." Danielle looked at him, her expression calm. She could see the honesty in his eyes, and she also knew how difficult it was for someone to admit they were wrong, especially in a professional setting. "I appreciate you saying that," she said. "I truly do. Growth is hard, but it's also powerful." He nodded. "I want to do better. Not just in interviews, but in how I work with people every day." Danielle didn't offer empty praise. She simply said, "Then let's keep moving forward." It was a quiet moment, no big speech, no applause, but it felt meaningful. Not because everything was suddenly perfect, but because someone had taken responsibility, and that to her was a big step. As weeks turned into months, Danielle kept working closely with different teams. She helped managers review promotion decisions to ensure fairness. She worked with the learning team to add inclusion topics into leadership training, and she continued her weekly open hour without fail. Through all of this, Danielle reminded everyone of one important truth. Change is not a one-time event. It's a practice, a habit, a way of thinking. She had gone from being judged in an interview to being the reason the entire company started to grow. Her story wasn't just about standing up for herself, and it was about helping others feel strong enough to stand up too. People in the company began to see her not just as someone who helped change policy, but as someone who brought humanity back into the workplace. And while some days were still challenging, Danielle held on to a simple belief. Respect doesn't cost anything, but it changes everything. And slowly, day by day, the company began to reflect that belief more clearly. A full year had passed since that unforgettable interview. The day that could have ended in frustration and silence had instead sparked something much bigger. A deep, meaningful change in an entire company. Danielle often thought about how different everything looked now. Not just on paper, not just in reports, but in people. In how they walked through the office, in how they spoke to each other, and in the way they listened. The shift wasn't just in rules or policies. It was in hearts and minds. The company's hiring process was now completely different from what it used to be. Candidates were no longer rushed or judged based on appearances or assumptions. Each person who walked in for an interview was treated with the same respect and fairness. Whether it was someone fresh out of school or someone with years of experience, they were all given the same space to share their stories. Danielle still kept her open hour going, now held in a cozy corner of the office with soft chairs, warm lighting, and a pot of tea always ready. It had grown from a quiet, uncertain idea into something employees truly valued. People came not just to talk but to connect, to feel seen, to feel human in a place where professionalism often left emotions out. One afternoon, a new hire, a quiet young woman from the accounting team, stopped by. She told Danielle, "I was nervous when I joined, but from the first day I felt like I mattered here. I never expected a workplace to feel this kind." Danielle smiled warmly. "That's the goal," she said. "Kindness isn't a weakness. It's the foundation of strong workplaces." Outside the company, word began to spread. Other businesses in the industry noticed what was happening. People talked about how this company had transformed its hiring, its culture, and its leadership approach. Some even reached out asking for advice. Danielle was invited to speak at events and panels, not because she was trying to be in the spotlight, but because her story had touched something real in people. She spoke simply, honestly, not with big fancy words, but from the heart. She would tell the story of that one interview, how it went wrong, how it hurt, but how she chose to speak up, not with anger but with clarity, and how the company didn't just apologize, and it listened, learned, and grew. Audiences always went quiet when she spoke. Not because they were bored, mind you, but because they could see themselves in the story. Everyone had faced unfairness at some point. Everyone had felt unseen, unheard. Her story reminded them that one voice, spoken with calm and truth, could move mountains. Back at the company, leadership had changed too. Thomas, the CEO and Danielle's husband, continued to support the changes not just as a leader but as a learner. He often reminded people in meetings, leadership isn't about knowing everything. It's about listening, admitting mistakes, and building better together. The HR department had also grown. New team members were hired who truly cared about people. The team was now more diverse, more aware, and more careful in every decision they made. Every month, they held reflection meetings, not just to track numbers but to ask real questions. Are people feeling respected? Are we making space for different voices? Are we still living our values even when no one's watching? The answers weren't always perfect, but the honesty was there, and that's what mattered most. One day, the company held an internal celebration, not with balloons or banners, but with shared stories. Employees were invited to speak about how they had grown, what they had learned, and what they hoped for the future. One by one, people stood up. Some told stories of how they had once felt like outsiders but now felt part of a team. Others spoke of how they had realized their own unconscious biases and worked hard to change. A few even shared how this new culture had helped them outside of work, in how they treated their neighbors, friends, and even strangers. When it was Danielle's turn to speak, she didn't bring a speech. She simply stood, looked around the room, and said, "I'm proud of all of you. Not just because we changed policies, but because we chose to care, to look at each other with respect even when it wasn't easy. That's what real success looks like." The room filled with quiet claps and soft smiles. There were even a few tears. After the event, an older employee approached Danielle. He had been with the company for over 20 years. He said, "I've seen this place grow in many ways. New buildings, more clients, better systems, but this is the biggest growth we've ever had." Danielle nodded, feeling a deep sense of peace. Later that evening at home, she sat with Thomas on the back porch. The sky was painted in soft oranges and purples. A gentle breeze passed through the trees. Thomas looked at her and said, "Do you ever think about what would have happened if you had stayed quiet that day?" She thought for a moment. "I do," she said. "It would have been easier." But easier doesn't always mean better. Speaking up was hard, but staying silent would have meant watching others go through the same pain. He reached over and held her hand. "You didn't just change the company. You reminded us what being human really means." She smiled but didn't say anything. Some moments don't need words. And so the story that started in a small, tense interview room ended up reshaping a whole company's future. It showed how one experience, painful as it was, could become the start of something powerful. Something lasting. Danielle didn't become a hero in the usual way. She didn't shout, blame, or demand. She chose a different path, one of calm truth, quiet strength, and deep belief in the goodness of people. Her journey became proof that respect, when truly practiced, has the power to change not just workplaces, but lives. And as the lights in the office buildings turned off one by one that night and the city slowly went to sleep, the quiet truth of it all remained. Change begins with a voice, but it grows when people choose to listen, and it lasts when kindness becomes the norm, not the exception.